Hi, I'm Carl Taylor, and I finally found a tethering cable that actually works consistently with the huge files that come out of the X2D2. So in today's video, I want to talk to you a little bit about tethering. I have made a video in the past about the benefits of tethering. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit more about when I use it, when I don't use it. But more importantly, many photographers that are owners of the Hasselblad X2D and the X2D2 have had difficulties with tethering. Two reasons. One, the actual tethering port connection, and two, the tethering buffer speed, the connectivity speed, so that when you're shooting rapidly and you've got these huge 100 megapixel 16-bit files flying through that tethering cable, sometimes it was getting jammed and clogged up. Now, I've used tether tools in the past. They are a reputable brand, made some good kit. I used their tethering cables when I was using the H6. They work really well. I did buy one of their new tethering cables for this camera and I couldn't get it to work. So I actually bought another one and it still didn't go up to speed. And that was even one with the booster thing. I then resorted to going on Amazon and finding some high-speed cables, and that one there didn't work. This one here did work, but it was only a couple of meters long, and it is a 10 gigabit per second, I think. And it worked, and it's flexible enough and all the rest of it, but it wasn't very long. So I kind of like struggled with that unless I was just doing product shoots and had the camera fairly close to my laptop. Then interestingly, just out of the blue, and let me just say, this is not I'm not getting paid for this video. It's not a paid promotion. I'm not doing any affiliate. We never do any affiliate links or any of that stuff. We're completely independent. I just got sent this out of the blue by a company I never heard of. They're called Loloboo Tethering. I'll bring their website and details up. They said, look, we've got a cable that is 5 meters long, super fast connectivity, 10 gigabits per second. And I thought, all right, fine, I'll take it. They're giving it to me for free. Doesn't cost that much anyway. And I received it and I started testing it. And this so far has been consistently brilliant. Now, let me tell you a little bit about how I use the tethering cable. So on one end, I've got the L-shaped connector that you can see there. And on the other end, I've got the straight connector. This cable has got some sort of little slimline boosting device there in the middle. It's not very big at all, so there's no problem. Now, I use the tethering connection on the X2D series cameras. I prefer it with the L-shaped connector. And what I do is I open up these two trap doors. So there you can see the two port doors open. One is for a memory card, but I don't use the memory cards because it's got a solid state drive in this camera. But the reason I open both port doors is because I like the L-shaped connector to go in there. And although it will fit with the bottom port door closed, it is actually quite solid on the X2D2. I think it's better than on the X2D Mark 1. But with both doors open, I can push that cable in a little bit further. So you can see there, it goes in a little bit more solid. And I like the L-shaped cable because then the cable runs straight down. So when I've got this mounted on my tripod or mono stand, this cable's just going down nicely. And then the other end just goes into USB-C on the computer. I don't know if you saw that. There it is, just going in there. And with this cable as it is, I've got 5 meters of play now. That's way more than I've had recently functioning properly. So that's a big bonus. So the question is, can it handle the loads? So let's go into the tethering. So we're going to talk a little bit about why I tether and when I tether as well in a moment, but let's first just give you some evidence on this cable. So at the moment, you can see I'm at 1/2 of a second, f5.6, 6400 ISO, and I'm just going to put it into manual focus so that I don't have any delay from the focusing, so I can like maximize the shooting speed. One of the things to keep in mind is that when you're tethered with this camera, it doesn't allow you to shoot continuous, but you can still shoot quickly in single shot mode. I don't want the focus to be seeking each shot, so I'm just going to focus it in manual mode and then just shoot. So let me just get it manually focused on that chair. I'm actually just looking towards my reception area there, taking a picture, and there you can see it's come straight into the tethering software, no problem at all. Now it actually looks a little bit overexposed, so I'm just going to drop that to f6.8, do it again. And the reason I'm doing it handheld is so that you can see that it's a different photograph every time and I'm not just repeating the shot. So that's just a shot of our reception area. Now, the other great thing with this is that at 6400 ISO, technically it should be actually more problematic because the camera's got more processing to do for the higher ISO speed. So let's see if I just keep shooting really quickly, and I'll move around a little bit in between each shot. So click, 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 click. And every one of those shots has come through smoothly, no problem at all. I've got no buffer warnings. I've got no USB-C connection fail warnings. They've all come through really, really well. So super happy with that. And as you can see, that was even at a high ISO. Now, why is this important? Well, because so many other tethering cables I've used, when you start shooting rapidly like that, especially if you're doing fashion or beauty shots where you need to shoot at maybe a more speedy rate, I've had problems with connectivity. The other thing that is really important with tethered shooting for me is the live view option. There's our cameraman, there's me on the reference monitor, and obviously he's not in focus there because I'm in manual focus. There he is there, look. So I'm in live view now, filming me, and you can see I'm in live view there. I can refocus. So live view, no problem at all. Super good connectivity. There's my motorbikes. There's the studio, blah, blah, blah. So in live view, all good as well. And I can also take a shot whilst in live view. That shot comes through there, as you can see there. So for me, this camera, this tethering cable is delivering the best connectivity I've seen from any cable so far. Now, the advantage here is that I've now got 5 meters instead of a little short cable. So the short cable was giving me, the one that I found on Amazon, was giving me the connectivity speed, but didn't have the cable length. And as I just demonstrated, this has now got a great deal of length. And why is that important? Well, that's important because if I'm doing a beauty shoot or a fashion shoot, and I've got a model jumping around and skipping around, I've got complete freedom now to move around and not run out a cable, and it's all there. Because recently I've been doing some of my beauty shoots and fashion shots untethered because the tethering cables that I'd found that work with this camera were too short. So now, if I want to shoot tethered on a beauty or fashion shoot, I've got that possibility, which is great. So, for those of you that are not familiar with tethering, let's explain a little bit about it. As I said, we've got another video on it, but what it does is it gives you the ability to, instead of taking pictures into your memory card or into the camera's internal storage, the camera images go straight from the camera to your laptop and allow you to see it on a big screen. Why is that useful? Well, because you get to see the image exposure, the lighting, the composition, everything about your image in much, much greater detail, because you've now got the image full screen, or you can have it full screen. So you're able to study the result. Now, in product photography, this is super, super important, and that's the majority of the commercial work I do, is highly detailed product photography, or maybe automobiles or that sort of stuff. And you really need to study for every little lighting detail, you know, all the small possibilities of things in the details and the lighting. And when you're working tethered and you've got that image going into your computer, it's really easy to then just click and zoom and check every detail really, really carefully. The next advantage with tethered shooting is that if you're using a really good quality calibrated monitor, like I use here with my ISO monitor, I know that the image exposure is correct, and I can take measurements of the white values, the black values, the midtones, the colors. You can use a color checker card. I can do everything I need to make sure that the image is in total control, within the dynamic range, etc., and everything is there. So it's just that level of detail that you can get from tethered shooting by moving away from reviewing the images on this smaller screen to then reviewing it on a larger screen. And that's super, super important when detail is the absolute priority, which is why I use it in product photography for every single shoot. Now, some people in the past have said to me, or left messages on videos saying, oh, well, tethered shooting's great, if you've got a big budget and all the rest of it. But that's actually complete nonsense, because tethered shooting costs no more than the cable. Because nearly every camera, whether it's a Sony, Canon, Nikon, whatever, nearly every camera these days has the ability to tether with the right cable. Now, while we're on the subject of cable, this particular cable is by Loloboo, is the brand name. I think they're operating out of Dubai. I don't really know, I can't remember. But the details on their tethering cables are here on this page, and the website is, there you go. And as I say, I'm not getting paid anything for this, for promoting this. I'm just happy to talk about something that works well when I find it does the job. This cable, this is in their local currency, but I was told that it's equivalent to about $69 US. So $69 gets you a top-end tethering cable that even handles 100 megapixel files for the X2D. And I know a lot of X2D users, because as an ambassador for Hasselblad, I get a lot of people email me asking me for advice on the cameras, and I get a lot of messages about what tethering cable they can use. So this is one I've tested, and this is one that works for $69. Now, going back to my earlier point, is people were saying, oh, well, it's fine, you've got loads of money to spend on tethering, but tethering isn't expensive. You just need a good cable. So $69 here, some may be less. You don't necessarily even need this level of speed if you're using a lower resolution camera, maybe a Nikon or Canon or Sony or something. But the cable is pretty much it, because the software usually comes with the camera. So the software that I'm using to shoot these images tethered here is the Hasselblad focus software that comes with the camera. With Canon, Sony, Nikon, many other camera brands, they provide a basic tethering software with the camera. If they don't, you can even use Lightroom. Lightroom has the ability to tether, you can connect with a cable, and it even gives you control of the camera's aperture and shutter speed and ISO and the trigger button to actually fire the camera. So you don't even need to touch the camera to take the pictures. So it's like using a cable release as well, which is also beneficial when working in the studio on still life. Now, the more advanced tethering software, such as Focus from Hasselblad, or another great one is Capture One, which is used by the phase camera systems, but it's also compatible with other cameras. So you can buy Capture One as a standalone software, and that software will work with Sony, Nikon, Canon. They've got all the lists of the compatible cameras. Doesn't work with Hasselblad. Hasselblad make their own. I love the Hasselblad Focus software. Within the software, you have all the controls for adjusting the exposure, changing your ISO, changing your camera settings, changing your aperture, etc., etc. And then you have way more than that in camera adjustments, color control, noise, lens correction, all these variables and all the same stuff in Capture One. You've also got the ability for some amazing controls on focus stacking. So if you want to take advantage of focus stacking by moving the focus point across the image at various depths across the image to then build one image that is super sharp with super depth of field the whole way across, you can use the automated focus stacking features that are part of this software. It comes as standard in the Focus software, and I believe it comes as standard in Capture One as well. So there are no budget limitations. You know, even if you opt for the free software that comes with a camera, you can still shoot tethered. You just need a cable, and that's it. So in nearly all situations where you're shooting still life, maybe a bowl of fruit, maybe a vase of flowers, it might be a macro shot of an insect, it might be whatever, tabletop shot. In all of those type of scenarios and product photography, jewelry, etc., tethered shooting is by far the best method for you to establish whether your lighting is right, whether the details are in focus, whether there's imperfections in the subject that you're photographing that need to be cleaned up, etc., etc. Tethered shooting gives you another level of clarity to your decision making, which is also the argument as to why I don't use a light meter, because tethered software can measure the light values in the shot. You can also record those light values. So if we look here, for example, I can turn on this tool. I can take a reading here, and I can take a reading here, and a reading here, and a reading here, and we can see whether or not this is blown out. No, it's not. It's 204, 213, 229, and as we know, 255 in red, green, and blue is the limit. We've also got the measurements down here. We've got the same in Capture One that you can set, the same in Lightroom. So I can measure color checker cards, I can measure values within the image, and those values can be saved with the image file. So if you needed the repeatability factor that people often talk about with light meters, well, you can't get any more repeatable than a measured value tethered, that if you need to reproduce the exact same levels of exposure, you can refer to those RGB values that you've measured from within the tethered image. And also keep in mind that those measured values are actually far more accurate than most light meters. Most light meters work to about 1/10 of an f-stop accuracy. When you're shooting tethered, you're dealing with RGB values from 0 to 255, 0 being black. If red, green and blue are 0, that's black. And if red, green and blue are 255, that's pure white. When you look at the incremental values of just say one density measurement, you're talking approximately, it's not quite linear, but you're talking about 1/30th of an f-stop variable there. So actually using measured values in tethered software is more accurate than using a light meter. So that's another reason why tethering for me is a fantastic tool, especially for photographing artwork, reproduction stuff, because you can really get down to very, very specific measurements. So when do I shoot without tethering? Well, there are occasions where just having the cable hanging out the camera when you're moving around is a little bit frustrating. So I have found actually that with modern cameras, with really good screens and really good displays, then you don't actually need to worry too much. Because what I do as a general condition with all my cameras is I compare the image on the back of the camera to the same image taken tethered on a calibrated monitor. And if the value of the image on the back of the camera doesn't look quite right, I can go into the display settings and I can adjust the screen brightness. So it allows me to adjust that screen brightness, as will, you know, most cameras, and I can adjust it until it looks about the same as my calibrated monitor. And then I know that what I'm seeing on screen is actually very, very close to what I need there. Additionally, I can bring up more information. I can either have no data or anything at all there, or I can bring up the image data. I can bring up the histogram with the RGB values, or I can just bring up a generic overall luminosity histogram. And I can look at the histogram in conjunction with the image on the screen, and I've got enough information there to make a decision about, is it in the ballpark exposure-wise? Additionally, the other great thing on most modern cameras as well is if you really want to look at the detail, double click and it zooms right in for you. So you can actually check the detail and then you can pan around and zoom around, double click and zoom back out. So you've got this ability to zoom right in and look at the highlight detail and look at it in conjunction with the histogram information. And if you've verified that your screen on the back of your camera looks very similar to the exposure level in your tethered shooting, then you can have quite a lot of confidence just off the screen on the back of the camera. And keep in mind that the screens on the back of the camera these days are miles ahead of where they were 5 years ago. So that in itself is actually a really good creative tool, because what I now find myself doing is on certain fashion and beauty shoots where I just want that freedom, I don't really want the cable dangling around. If I've got a client shoot that I'm doing and they need to see the images as I'm shooting them, or I've got makeup artists, hairstylists, etc., and I need them to see the images coming in so they can keep an eye on things, then fine. This solution with a 5-meter cable is great. But it doesn't mean to say you have to use it. So often for beauty, fashion, that sort of stuff, then having that versatility and just relying on the screen also negates the necessity to use a light meter often as well. I'm not saying you can't use a light meter. I used a light meter from 1990 till 2005 because I was shooting film. And with film, you have no preview on the camera. So you have to rely on some form of light meter. You can partially rely on the built-in light meter, but as soon as you start using flash and other light, you need to measure that light to be sure it's correct. But if you can see the image and you know you can trust the image, then it's not necessary to use a light meter. So let's think about situations where tethering becomes difficult. A situation where tethering is difficult would be shooting on location. There are times when I've shot on location and I've actually had my laptop on location and I've shot tethered and I've looked at it. But it's not easy balancing your laptop on a rock or your camera bag or whatever, etc. It becomes more tricky. So generally speaking, I don't shoot tethered on location unless it was an important fashion image and I had a flat surface and assistants and people to handle it and manage it for you. However, there are other options with tethering these days, and it's a sort of remote tethering option where the Wi-Fi facility can send a low-res JPEG to the mobile version of the camera software. So for example, with Hasselblad, they've got a mobile or tablet version of the Focus software. I think Capture One do as well. And I believe it can relay the images via Wi-Fi to your device so that someone else, an assistant, digital assistant, could be holding it and letting you know if there's any issues or problems. Not much different to you looking at it on the back of the camera, of course, but you can just therefore transition and pass the job over to someone else, or potentially even a client on location could be seeing previews of what's going on. And I think we're going to see, even better tech with transmitting potentially higher res images from the raw files as well. Now, talking of raw files, let's just think about this as well, because this goes back to the whole thing about tethering. Obviously, it's good to get your exposure correct to begin with, and even if you're using the back of the camera as the preview to get it correct to begin with. But we're talking about shooting raw here. We should be shooting raw. And when we've got this incredible dynamic range available to us, even if I was slightly out on the exposure, I can pull those highlights back, I can lift those shadows up, I can adjust the exposure in general, just on the general EV adjustments, but I can dive into the shadow or the highlight detail to pull in any corrections as required. So you've got that latitude and flexibility anyway with the raw file that will often get you out of trouble. Back in the early 90s, when I was working in photojournalism, traveling around shooting film, a light meter was absolutely essential to me because I was shooting transparency film like Kodachrome 25, Kodachrome 64. The latitude for error was tiny. It was about a quarter of an f-stop. If you were out by a quarter of an f-stop above or below, there was unrecoverable data from the image. It was blown out or solid blacked out. So you needed a light meter to ensure accuracy when shooting on such tight latitudes. But today's cameras, today's raw files, you can pull things back from the dead with some of the raw file stuff that we've got now. Anyway, so that gives a little bit of explanation about why I shoot tethered, how I shoot tethered, when I shoot tethered, and some of the benefits of shooting tethered. And now you know, with this particular cable, I've found a cable that actually works well with the Hasselblad X2D system.